Hey guys, I'm really excited about our video today. Today we're going to be talking about a legend here in Georgia, and it's a legend that I never heard before. I stumbled upon this legend while I was doing research for Oakland Cemetery, and since then I cannot stop watching videos, reading blogs, all revolving around this legend that is over a century old. Welcome to Esoteric Atlanta. My name is Brice, and today we're going to be talking about the werewolf of Georgia. Anyway, I had to pull my hair back because otherwise I was going to be sweating like a whore in church throughout this whole video. So now, let's get started. So our story doesn't take place in Atlanta. Our story takes place in Talbot County. And Talbot County is about 90 miles southwest of Atlanta. It's close to the Alabama border between Macon and Columbus, Georgia. And Columbus, Georgia is on the Alabama border. Jesus Christ, it's so freaking hot in here. Talbotton is the county seat of Talbot County, but our story takes place in a smaller town outside of Talbotton. Back when the story happened, this town was called Pleasant Hill. Now it's called Woodland. It actually incorporated as Woodland in 1908. At a 2010 census, there was only about 400 people living in Woodland, Georgia, which is, I think there's more than 500 people living on my block in Atlanta. So to me, that's so small. Now our story starts in the late 1800s in Pleasant Hill. This story revolves around the Burt family. Joel and Mildred Burt had 4 children. And Joel Burt died at the age of 40, which in today's time is very young. And he left quite a fortune to his widow, Mildred. Mildred was 37 at the time. I'm 37 and I don't have any children. And to me, that just still seems so young. But again, we have to think about the 1800s. People didn't live as long as we live now. So anyway, Mildred was left with this fortune and all these children, and so she decided, as the legend goes, she decided that she was going to send her children off to boarding school in Europe so that she could live the social life of Talbot County. Well, one of her daughters, a daughter by the name of Emily Isabella Burt, came home from a semester away at boarding school, and her demeanor had changed. Now, Emily Isabella Burt went by the name Emmy, so I am going to refer to her as Emmy for the rest of this story. Emmy was already supposedly a very shy child, so she already kind of had this disposition of being a little bit awkward. But on her return from her semester away in Europe, she had changed even more. She couldn't sleep. She was suffering from insomnia. She would go out and walk the fields at night. She would sometimes just stare off into space at nothing. Just very, very, very different. And not only did her mother start to pick up on it, but the townspeople also started to pick up on it as well. Now again, this is a very small community and it's a very wealthy family in a very small community. So of course, this is going to be a hot topic among the Talbot County socialites. So over the course of some time, it appeared that a lot of people's livestock were being mutilated and killed in very savage ways in the middle of the night. This became a huge problem. People were losing massive amount of animal livestock. The townsfolk realized that there was a wild animal on the loose, and they would try to hunt this animal and try to figure out a way to put an end to the killings, but nothing they did seemed to work. Well, in the town, there was this what was described as the town weirdo, this like Eastern European guy that they thought maybe practiced some black magic. He just was very strange to them. So out of desperation, they went to this local weirdo and asked him, what do we do? How do we get rid of this animal that's attacking our livestock? Well, this gentleman said that it did not look like it was a typical wild animal, but instead it looked like it was a werewolf. Now, the legends of werewolf have been around Europe for a very, very long time. I'm not going to really go into that because we're not talking about Europe, we're talking about Georgia. But you can research yourself to see all the different legends that come out of, especially Eastern Europe, around werewolves. So this Eastern European gentleman said that they needed to take all their crosses, their silver crucifix and crosses, and melt them down into silver bullets. And these would be the bullets that would kill the werewolf. Well, one night as they were out hunting, they saw this beast running through the town and they fired. As they fired, they heard a scream and the beast ran off. Well, the next morning, Emmy had a bullet hole in her hand. Now, just a disclaimer, I don't know if this Eastern European man actually existed. He's just been a character that has been added to the legend over time. I know that it calls him a weirdo, and that's not my opinion on anybody from Eastern Europe at all. That is just mimicking a lot of the blogs I read from the legends that started at that time. They thought this man was very weird. Now, if this man really did exist, I don't know if he practiced black magic. It could be that his culture was just so very different from the typical Georgian that he got labeled and he himself kind of became a legend. I don't know, but I just want to make sure that people understood that. This is coming straight from blogs that I've read and how the legend unfolded. So when Mildred found Emmy with a bullet hole in her hand, she quickly took Emmy and shipped her back off to Europe, to Paris, to be treated by a doctor in Paris. You see, from what I read, Emmy's mother, Mildred, already suspected that her daughter was the reason why this livestock was being mutilated. Like I said, as she returned home from Europe from boarding school, she suffered from insomnia. Things had changed about her, and she was known to take these long walks at night. So as a mother, Mildred did what she could to remove her daughter from the situation. And as soon as Emmy left and was sent back to Europe, the mutilation stopped. The livestock was safe. And then when Emmy returned back to Talbot County in Georgia, she came back and she was pretty much her old self, the self she was before ever going to Europe in the first place for school. And everything seemed to die down. Emmy never married herself, and she ended up dying in 1911 at the age of 70. And ever since then, Emmy has been known as the werewolf of Georgia. In fact, legend states that you can still go to her grave and hear werewolves howling, and that sometimes she even comes back to her wolf form to roam the grounds of Georgia. So let's go back to the beginning of the story and let's relook at this story from a more practical perspective. Because where there's smoke, there is fire. Do I believe that Emmy is a werewolf? Not really, because I've never seen a werewolf. I mean, legends don't just start from nothing. There has to be something that gave birth to this legend. So from my research, this is what I found. As I said, Joel and Mildred Burt were very wealthy and they had about 4 children. Emmy, unfortunately for the time, looked a lot like her father. Emmy had a lot of hair. She was very hairy, and she had big, bushy eyebrows. Now, if Emmy was alive today, she would be in vogue because bushy eyebrows are all the the rage right now, and I can't get my eyebrows to grow, so I'm just gonna have to pass on that trend. But back in the late 1800s, she wasn't a pretty girl. Emmy also was said to have really bad teeth, and her mother Mildred took her to dentists to try to do something to fix her teeth, but the dentist really couldn't do a whole lot back then. Now, of course, today we have so much we can do with dental procedures to help people who unfortunately don't have good teeth. They even said that her teeth were pretty sharp, which would understandably make people believe that they were wolf's teeth. Now, Emmy was also an avid reader. I'm an avid reader. A lot of my friends are avid readers, but back in the late 1800s, that was not a woman's place. You know, women were supposed to go, especially in high society in the South, from their father's house to their husband's house. Or for my generation, from their father's house to the sorority house to their husband's house. And Emmy, unlike a lot of the other girls in that time in the South who were always socializing and trying to find their husbands, she would sit in her family library and read a lot. Apparently, her favorite stories were stories about the occult and about ghosts and legends and the supernatural. She had an imagination. I'm sure that Emmy was probably very, very, very smart. I wish I knew what her IQ was. So Emmy was not the most popular person in the town, and there was probably a lot of rumors going around about her. I can only imagine what was said about her, snickered about her behind closed doors. I mean, it kind of breaks your heart, doesn't it? I'm sure that Emmy was bullied. And I'm sure that through all that bullying, she probably thought people who got close to her were only getting close to her because she was the daughter of a very wealthy family. And being the daughter of a very wealthy family, she comes with an inheritance. Now, I did find that it was true that Emmy struggled with insomnia. In fact, Mildred, her mother, took her to a doctor to get some medication to help her sleep. And with this elixir was opium. Now, we all know the side effects of opium today. Opium does make you feel really good and really relaxed, but there are some side effects that change your behavior and change your moods. So this was huge to me when I read this. Now, I also know that with a lot of people who struggle with insomnia, it's because they're experiencing PTSD. Now, I'm not a therapist, I don't work in mental health, but I have been diagnosed with CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and I too struggle with insomnia from my anxiety. Personally, one of the therapies that I've gone through to help with my anxiety is EMDR. So when we go through stress, and it's a normal amount of stress, usually when we go to sleep at night and we get into REM sleep, or our deepest place of sleep, our eyes will start to move back and forth. This is also the time where the body comes completely still, where people can experience sleep paralysis. But while the body is in that deep layer of sleep and the eyes are moving back and forth, the eyes are rewiring the connections to the brain, so that when we wake up in the morning, we're calmer and we're clearer. That's why people will say, sleep on it. However, when you experience stress that you can't quite handle, your body doesn't have the ability to go into that deep place of sleep. So therefore, your eyes never get the chance to clear out that passage to your brain. And that's what EMDR is. EMDR, you actually follow a finger back and forth to help your eyes mimic what they should be doing while you're asleep. It's worked wonders for me. Now, with Emmy not being able to sleep and having insomnia, and from all the crazy stories I heard about her life, it is in my opinion that any odd behavior she was showing was a side effect of PTSD. You add an opiate on top of that, and you probably have a person who seems weird, becomes the black sheep of the town, becomes the person snickered about. And I can understand how a legend about this person, especially given her appearance, would have evolved. Now, there was a time when a rabid animal was killing the livestock in the town. That is true. But the only thing that I could find was from a newspaper article back in that day, basically saying that a rabid animal is loose killing the livestock. There was nothing in the newspaper or from any other reputable source that said anything about a werewolf. Now, of course, in the legend, it is stated that Mildred sent her children to boarding school in Europe, and that's where the origins of Emmy becoming a werewolf came from. However, I can't find anything to validate whether that is true or not. Yes, the Burts were an extremely wealthy family. Yes, Joel Burt died young. Yes, Mildred Burt was left at 37 years old as a widow. However, again, nothing on whether her kids actually left the country and went to Europe. Now, here's the thing, what I find a little strange too. I don't see why a prominent family in a small town in Georgia would send their kids to Europe to boarding school, especially their daughters. If anything, I would see her possibly sending them to a school in Atlanta or maybe to some schools up in New England, but I don't really understand or think that someone in her position would send them to Europe. Where they live, there is no need for the children at that time to be bilingual. The daughters, all they needed to know was how to maybe play the piano and sew and socialize in the aristocratic society of Talbot County. I just wonder if that part of the story was added in later because of the origins of werewolves coming from Europe. Now, again, this is my assumption giving the time period. For me as Brice, in the modern times, I absolutely think that every person should take every educational opportunity offered to them. Both of my grandmothers went to college. I come from a family that pushes education. Education is extremely important to my family. And I grew up being no different than any of the males in my family. As a female, it was expected that I get a high education as well. So that's not coming from me personally. That's just what I know of during that time period, if that makes sense. Now, in the legend, we also know that after Emmy was shot in her hand, her mother rushed her back to Paris to go to a doctor who treated mental disorders. And this is where the stories kind of merge for me, and my opinions start to get a little hazy. So while in Paris, Emmy was being treated for a mental disorder called lycanthropy. Lycanthropy is a disorder where someone has the delusion that he or she is a werewolf. And again, I can't find any information to validate whether this is true or not. I also cannot find any information to validate whether Emmy was shot in her hand or not. But there is a slight possibility that Emmy, given her life circumstances, given the fact that she was super hairy, had teeth that resembled that of a wolf, spent a lot of time reading stories about mystical lands, maybe developed lycanthropy. And maybe because of trauma, she spent her days removing herself mentally from reality and placing herself as a person with magical powers that can shapeshift into a wolf. If this is the case, then it's very obvious that yes, we do have a werewolf from Georgia. Because if Emmy was acting out as a werewolf in her state of delusion caused by trauma or whatever, then she would have been rightly called a werewolf. Now, along with this story of lycanthropy, I did find another story regarding the situation with the livestock. Now, one account that I read regarding the livestock situation involved one of Emmy's sister's beaux or boyfriends. It is said that this guy named William Gorman, who again was Emmy's sister's boyfriend, came over to the Burt house to warn Mildred, Emmy's mother, that they were going to go out and hunt for this animal. It is said that Mildred Burt, Emmy's mother, had a lot of guns that she had inherited from her husband and was a pretty good shooter, marksman herself. And because she knew that her daughter was dealing with some mental imbalances, some delusions, that she went out with the men to hunt the beast herself, taking her gun in a way to try to protect Emmy, because in her gut she knew that Emmy was the cause of these problems. And when she went out that night, she heard the shot, heard her daughter get shot, and ran off and brought her daughter home. And it was after that that she sent Emmy to Paris to get her away from the town to treat her mental disorder. So as you can see, there's a lot of different theories, a lot of speculation around this story. Will we ever know the truth? Who knows? As I said, Emmy went on to live to be about 70 years old. She spent most of her life in Talbot County after she got back from Paris and had been treated and was healed from whatever was causing the lycanthropy, if she even went to Paris at all. She was a wealthy woman herself. She had inherited money. She also was a landowner. And as she got older in age, because she had never married, she ended up moving into her sister, whose name was also Mildred, her sister's daughter's house up in Marietta, Georgia. Marietta, Georgia is where my sister actually lives. And these were two elderly women at this time that were being cared for by one's daughter and one's niece. Now, Emmy died in 1911, and her body was sent back to Talbot County. Emmy was buried in the Owens Cemetery. Her mother, Mildred, was an Owens. That was her maiden name. And Joel, her father, and her mother, Mildred, had been buried in that family cemetery. And so Emmy was buried in the Owens family cemetery. Now, a lot of people say that they'll try to go find the cemetery. The cemetery itself is on private property. So I wouldn't go to Talbot County and start hunting down the cemetery. It is on private property. It is owned by a family. You're not going to find it. And if you do find it, you're going to be charged with trespassing. So now Emmy's obituary appeared in the Talbotton New Era, the newspaper, on Thursday, July 20th, 1911. They said that her name was that of Christian greatness and grace. In fact, the obituary was very loving towards Emmy and talked about how much the town loved her. There was no mention of any scandals or any legends. However, her niece, the person responsible for her burial, had something very peculiar placed on her headstone. It said, "Thy form alone is all. Thank God that to thy grave is given. For we know thy soul, the better part, is safe, yes, safe in heaven." So what do you think? Do you think Emmy was a werewolf? Do you think Emmy had lycanthropy and that explains where the legend came from? Or do you think Emmy was just an awkward girl who just was bullied? Let me know. Are you from Talbot County? Have you had experiences with this? Again, let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to try to do a bunch of legends this week because I find them so fascinating. And I will again want to thank Josh McKay for doing our music and for Todd Roderick for being our editor. And I thank you guys for becoming a part of our slow growing community. Again, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, tell your friends. And if you're from Georgia and you have a great legend to tell, or if you have a business that has a unique history that you want us to spotlight on this channel, send me a message. You can find us on Instagram at Esoteric Atlanta, and you can DM me there. Anyway, I hope you guys have an awesome day. See you soon. Bye.